I decided to go outside the box and I went back to school and I got a postdoc in clinical neurology, a master's in nutrition. I studied acupuncture, I studied
Wow. Wow.
chiropractic, functional medicine, anything I could get my hands on to figure out what was going on. And I'm
Right.
so glad that I did because along the way, I tinkered with my own brain and a lot of
Right.
things I learned in school and at conferences and reading scientific articles and books, I applied to my own brain and I was able to heal after all that trauma. And so it's been a very interesting journey for me. So many of the patients I see kind of went through a similar thing. They didn't go back to school, obviously, but they were in a car accident or they had some type of injury or trauma and they went to their doctor, they went to a neurologist, they went to a vestibular therapist, maybe even a chiropractor, maybe
Right.
they went to see a functional medicine practitioner to look at inflammation. But what I've learned is after my over 20 years of experience healing my brain and 15 years working with patients and clients, in order to heal from a concussion or heal the brain, you have to look at things holistically in what I
Right.
call the three pillars of brain health: the physical, chemical, and emotional. And the physical pillar of brain health refers to the actual communication pathways between our brain cells. So they have to be working well because, our brain, for example, we talked about the cerebellum earlier, really important for balance, for core stability, for our sense of grounding in this world, and it's very sensitive to trauma. So if
Mm.
you have an injury to the actual the connections between the brain cells here, you might not see it on a CT scan or MRI, but functionally those pathways, the communication is muffled. So then a
Right.
person can have symptoms, right? So that's the physical pillar, right? And there's all these different other areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is related to focus and concentration and emotional regulation. We have this other area over here called the brainstem. That's related to our ability to handle stress and what we call the vagus nerve to put the brakes on stress. And then we have all these different areas. My point is when the communication in those regions start to go south, that's when people start to have symptoms. So that's the physical pillar. But then we also have the chemical pillar of brain health. That's the second pillar I discovered. That's related to the brain and body chemistry. And so that's the neurochemical milieu that our physical brain exists in. So the best analogy I like to use is like you see this fig tree over here, this my fig tree.
Yeah.
You can see that like structurally the branches are pretty strong, the physical is strong, but if the soil is deplete of nutrients, right,
Right.
if I don't water it enough or if you start to have toxins or creepy crawlies in there, then the physical plant itself will start to fail. That's the
Right.
same thing with the brain. So that's the chemical pillar. So things like blood sugar balance, hormones, toxins, inflammation, those all influence brain function. That's the chemical pillar. And then last but not least is the emotional pillar. And things like stress and our mindset and what we believe about ourselves and the world around us, believe it or not, specifically impact our physical brain and how well our brain functions. So my point is though, like that's what I discovered in order to really heal the brain and heal from something like a concussion or chronic pain, you have to look at things holistically. And what I found is many, for example, it's not just a theoretical model, it's very pragmatic, meaning the physical pillar of brain health, like the physical connections, the only way to help restore function there is through things like brain training
Mm.
or specific types of treatments. It's kind of like you have to do specific types of exercises or treatments to target those areas.
I see.
Whereas, yeah, exactly. Whereas the chemical pillar, that's the only way to shift that is through things like diet, supplements, medications.
Right.
Those change the neurochemistry, right? And then finally, the emotional pillar, things like stress management practices, meditation, lifestyle, and wellness rituals, that changes the emotional pillar. So my point is a lot of times I see patients who maybe they went to, they tried within conventional medicine already, and they just didn't get help. Maybe the medications help with their symptoms, mask the symptoms, but it wasn't addressing the root cause. And then they had the side effects that they didn't want to deal with anymore, right?
Right.
That's a typical person that I work with. They might have tried the medication route, but they're just like, you know what? Something's missing, and I don't like the way these medications make me feel. But then maybe they go to like a naturopath or a functional medicine practitioner, and a lot of that training is really focused in on that chemical pillar,
Right.
right? Where they look at diet, they look at supplements, they run lab tests like stool tests and urine tests. Those are all things I do as well because of my training. And they might get like a dietary or supplement protocol, maybe some lifestyle things. But because the brain's unique, and because of that specific of the physical pillar, that it needs things in addition to healthy nutrients and diet and lifestyle. It needs activation. We need to do specific things to trigger what we call neuroplasticity in the nervous system to actually rewire the brain. So for example, many patients I work with, if they have chronic pain or headaches, especially like here, or maybe even brain fog, I actually find that they have a problem with this part of the brain we call the oculomotor center, which controls eye movements. Many times I find, especially a lot of people who find themselves on screens a lot and they feel brain foggy or just kind of like headachy here. And especially after a concussion, that's very common. I find that the areas of their nervous system that control and stabilize their eyes have become injured. And so they can't stabilize their eyes, but they don't know it, right? Because it's really subtle. They might have gone to their neurologist and they did a little eye movement test and everything was normal, quote unquote. But sometimes the subtle weaknesses, that's what triggers their symptoms. My point is, there's eye exercises, very specific personalized eye exercises you can do to trigger neuroplasticity that no fish oil or medication or diet change can touch.